So in any of these decisions, there's relevant costs. So what are relevant costs versus other types of costs? And these are costs that are applicable to a particular decision. And so this is a pretty abstract concept, but everything that we do has a cost, right? We have a trade-off. So I can decide to watch TV or to exercise for a given 30 minutes, right? We all can make these decisions, and we should only assess the costs if there's an alternative from our suggestion. So the idea is an alternative that's actually applicable, right? So it's not fair of me to say, hey, I could have watched TV for 30 minutes or exercised during that 30 minutes if actually exercise wasn't a real option. Maybe there was fire outside. We're all familiar with the fires and the smoke, and we have a small house and the baby's asleep. Like, there's nothing else you could have done. It's not really fair. It's not irrelevant to the decision making if it's not applicable. So we have to, as managers for businesses, we have to determine what actually costs matter, because some costs won't actually go into our assessment, right? So there are costs that are avoidable and unavoidable. So we only want to worry about avoidable costs. And so I shared in my blog, right? I used to own a recording studio, and after I purchased a certain amount of equipment and I have rent, I get to decide if I want to rent out the space of my recording studio, if I want to provide a service in the recording studio. But once I have purchased those products, I in theory have something called a sunk cost. And so that's where we're going here. The sunk costs are the results of past decisions that I can't change. Right? So after I've gone into a year lease, I can't then say, I can't afford this lease anymore. I'm not making enough money from it. I've already spent money for that lease. I don't get to get out of that lease. So the sunk costs are irrelevant to future decision making. I don't get to then decide, well, what if I broke my lease? It doesn't matter. You can't break your lease. Same if I've invested time into something. This theory of sunk costs is very important, because they found that people with gambling habits or people just in general who are in debt, they have trouble getting over this sunk cost philosophy, where we are a loss adverse society. So we don't like the idea that we lost money. And so it's very, very easy for people to go and say, well, because I've spent $100,000 on business A, even though it's losing money, I'm going to keep investing in business A. And so that's the example of my recording studio, right? I eventually, for the first few years, it was profitable. And then we had the recession of 2008, the financial crisis. And when that occurred, I started losing some significant money. I wasn't able to make a profit. Also, some new technology came out that made recording studios pretty obsolete. You could just do the same quality on your computer at home. So I had to start lowering my rates. And I had a lot of trouble leaving the business because I invested maybe $50,000 into the business. I had a $12,000 lease signed up in Hollywood, and I was only able to get people to pay about $30 an hour to do studio time, and then a lot of them wouldn't pay. And so I had a lot of trouble leaving that business, even though when I looked at alternatives, like I could tutor, I could teach music, I could even go bartend, they actually paid more than running the business itself. But I had this loss aversion of it. I already invested money into my business. I don't want to leave the business. So same thing for managers, these sunk costs, and same thing for you in your personal life. We cannot think of them in our future decision making. If there's better alternatives, even if we spent time or resources on a worse alternative, it's okay to leave. And so a good example of this is there's a card game that just got funded on Kickstarter called Deadly Desserts that I was actually an original partner with. But one of the partners wanted to very specifically spend a lot of money on advertising and marketing when he thought it could really blow up. And I did a kind of a cost analysis on it and saying, even if this did become really huge, you want me to spend an extra 10 hours a week on this project and spend an extra maybe $10,000 on marketing and selling expenses, and I can make about $200 an hour elsewhere. So that $200 an hour, I could be making $2,000 extra a week. And I don't think that product is going to make up for that time in the long run. So even though I had invested money originally into it, I was okay leaving the project because there were sunk costs, right? So, that was a right direction to make for me. I wound up making a lot more money because I left that project, even though it was successful. So this is very relevant to decision makings and will help you have more financial success in the future. So out-of-pocket costs are future outlays of cash associated with a particular decision. So that's a good example from that. If I knew that I would lose time and I'd have to spend maybe $1,000 a month on selling a marketing expense, that's an out-of-pocket cost in the future. That's a relevant decision because if I decide not to invest in that business, I won't have that out-of-pocket cost. And then the opportunity cost related to the business are what could I do as an alternative? So I took a pause and I try to do this, and I suggest everyone do it weekly or monthly. Take a pause and say, hey, are all the action I'm doing aligned with my goals and my vision for my life? Same thing with businesses. Businesses do this well too. Businesses that do this well succeed well. And so from an opportunity cost perspective, I looked, well, I could, if this sells 1,000 units a month, maybe I will get, and I spend 10 hours a week, maybe I'll get an extra $5,000 a month. But if I just work an extra 10 hours a week, I can make an extra $2,000 a week, which is an extra $8,000 a month. So do I want to put a lot of time and resources up front to eventually have a project that's not going to pay me as much as my current project, even if that other project does well? That's an opportunity cost. So I could weigh out, could I do that? Or I could get educated and get even a higher billable rate in the future. So it's fair of me to assess the opportunity costs of making a decision. Like what are the other options for me to succeed? Same thing with a business. What are my out-of-pocket costs? What is it going to cost me to make this decision? But it's not fair for me to look at the past. Like I worked on that project for almost a year. It was almost successful. It was actually a really difficult decision to make, to drop out of it. But when you look at the out-of-pocket and opportunity costs, it was a pretty easy decision. I just had to take the sunk costs out of it. So showing you, I probably lost a good amount of money from the recording studio that I didn't need to lose because I was thinking from a sunk cost mindset, but from a correct management decision framework mindset, I actually made a pretty solid decision related to because I was focused on out-of-pocket costs and opportunity costs.